Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing, as well as analysing tech news, which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. By golly gosh, there is lots of news today. So I hope you're all having an amazing day, because we're going to be jumping into lots of cool stuff. The first thing I'd like to begin with is a post from Rogame, and this actually concerns the next generation of AMD GPUs, Navi 2X. Specifically, there are no Navi 21 IDs that he can find. There are 4 Navi 22 IDs, you can read them yourself on screen, and there is a single Navi 23 ID, but they come under multiple different cards and SKUs and models. Now, reading part 2 of his tweet, he thinks that each Navi die has one ID with lots of distinct steppings, which of course makes sense. Navi 10 has an ID of 0x731F, and it's used 27 times. And meanwhile, Navi 14 is 0x7340, which is used 7 times. Which means that most likely Navi 23 appears 9 times with the same ID. So most likely there's going to be a full die model of this GPU. So let's say 80 compute units, and then there will be derivatives with lower numbers of dies. So obviously this will be based upon yields. This is an example, but we could see 80 compute units, 72 compute units, and so 64 compute units, but they are still utilizing the same core. It's just cut if we have defective compute units or other parts of the GPU while it's being built, which is obviously very similar to how you would expect. So the question is then, why is Navi 21 missing IDs? Komachi has actually discovered a series of ID ranges previously, which means, well, it's kind of baffling, because it either means that this card was never meant to come out and it was kind of for internal testing, or this card is a card that's going to come out later, Navi 21, or it's something entirely different, and quite frankly, speculation could just run wild. Navi 21 Lite is also the die which is found in the Xbox Series X, which we believe has 56 active compute units. We know that the Xbox has 12 T-flops, but the exact configuration of the GPU isn't known. With the internal testing documents, it seems like there were 56 compute units active, but of course it could end up being 52 compute units, and then they just crank the clock frequency of the GPU higher. Rogame tagged me and asked my my take on this, excuse me. Sorry for sounding a bit kind of all over the shop. I'm still getting over my plague. But anyway, Rogame tagged me in this, and what I can say is I've reached back out to one of my sources regarding AMD. He was the one who originally told me that Navi 23 is the Nvidia killer, and I asked him, does he know any further information? And according to him, he's almost certain that Navi 23 is the bigger of the dies. He knows a lot less about Navi 21, but most of the emphasis was put on Navi 23, and to all of his knowledge, Navi 23 is the bigger of the GPUs. With that said, the way he kind of described it to me, Navi 21 was intending to launch as well. So it's a bit of a mystery whether these cards are going to come later, or whether AMD are going to just kind of do like a top-down approach, a bit like Nvidia. Maybe we'll see the high-end SKUs launch first, and then the lower-end cards come out later, and basically they'll do kind of like an end-of-life for the 5000 series. And now from AMD, let's move over to Nvidia. And these discoveries have also been made by Rogame. He seems to be on a bit of a tear today, but he's discovered some entries on Geekbench which are super interesting for the simple reason, well actually, I was going to say the sheer performance of the cards and the specs, but also the age of the damn things. I mean, look at when they were posted. It's not like they're new, which kind of emphasizes the fact that sometimes benchmarks and engineering samples are just there in the database, but they take or they're either never discovered or they take some time to be discovered. Now, of course, at the end of the day, these GPUs do not specifically state next generation Nvidia GPU. They are unknown Nvidia GPUs. But looking at the higher end part, it's 7,552 CUDA cores, which is basically 118 compute units, and they are running at 1,110 megahertz for the core clock. Although, I would stress that it's potentially possible that these clock frequencies are not being reported correctly, and of course anything that is listed as unknown you should also take with specs may not be reported right as a general rule. Furthermore, we have another benchmark, and this particular benchmark is for 108 compute units, so 6,912 CUDA cores running at basically 1 GHz with 47 gigabytes of memory, which obviously 47 gigabytes of memory isn't quite correct. We'll get to that in just a second. But looking at the scores themselves, with the first GPU, which has 7,552 CUDA cores, that puts out 184,000 for its Geekbench 5 compute score, which is quite monstrous. This is much faster than the Titan RTX, which is around 130,000. And even the GV100, the highest end Volta SKU, is only around 140,000. And bear in mind that these are probably quite early engineering sample parts. So 47 gigabytes of memory is, well, let's face it, not realistic. Most likely it's 48 gigabytes, but something's going on with the card. Either it's not being reported correctly, or there's something hinky going on with the BIOS, or so on or so on. So, yeah, that's probable. Obviously, these parts are most likely, simply because we are looking at most likely higher bandwidth memory too, some type of card for high-performance computing. In which case, they could have a really wide bus, that's 6,144 bit or something like that, which could mean incredible amounts of memory bandwidth, almost 3 terabytes per second, at least theoretically speaking. There are lots of different configurations, and honestly, we could talk a lot about memory configurations, but because it's not being reported necessarily accurately, it's very difficult to make an exact guess. Either way, though, these parts are almost certainly the next generation Nvidia GPUs, and quite honestly, they're looking to be extremely impressive, and that's putting it mildly. And now, from AMD and Nvidia, let's move over to the PlayStation 5. I did tell you this video was kind of packed. The first thing I'd like to discuss is a smaller story that I actually didn't really discuss much yesterday. Well, actually, I didn't discuss it at all yesterday, and that concerns an external SSD which is being released by Patriot Gaming. And this potentially is a SSD which could be maybe used with the PlayStation 5. So there's a press statement for this, the brand new Patriot PXD M.2 PCI Type-C external SSD. It's when you have names like that, they're very catchy, people remember them, and you can just tell what it is right off the bat. I love it. Anyway, the next generation of portable storage solutions will be showcased and tested on the PlayStation 4 with Marvel's Spider-Man. This PCIe M.2 based SSD over USB 3.2 Type-C connectivity brings superb and stability using the Phison E13 PCIe controller, and capacities range from 512GB to 2TB. Now, this drive is definitely much slower than you would find in the PlayStation 5, at least from what we know about the PlayStation 5, which is obviously still kind of sketchy regarding the SSD, but we believe it's using PCIe 4 for its controller, and that would mean that we have much faster speeds than what's possible with USB. However, what's interesting is that the PlayStation 4 simply would be unable to fully leverage the speed of this SSD. Indeed, the PlayStation 4 only has USB 3.1 Gen 1, so that's capable of 625 megabytes per second, Whereas, technically speaking, this drive could hit up to 1 gigabyte per second read/write. That's obviously with the NVMe 1.3 protocol. So we can guess that the next generation PlayStation is going to have, at the very least, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 interface, which probably means the next generation PlayStation has what is basically a 10 gigabit per second link, whereas the Gen 1 port is only a 5 gigabit per second link. It's also possible it could be an even faster port. Kind of. Gen 2 times 2 is actually capable of 20 Gbps, which would obviously mean massive read and write speeds. So that would be around 2500 megabytes per second, which is faster than the 10 gigabit that's being stated here. But even so, I'm just saying that technically speaking, the PlayStation 5, given we don't know what the USB support is for the console, that would be one way for them to go to achieve really fast read and write speeds for an external drive. The rumour is with the Xbox that you can upgrade the storage using a CF Express form factor card, essentially. The thing is with those cards is they're not cheap. To give you an idea of what I mean by not cheap, just half a terabyte, so 512 gigabytes, could cost you around the $600 mark. So yeah, not cheap at all. It's probable that the Xbox Series X that we saw, with the ports leaked at the back, was most likely not something that we're going to see for the final retail console, because let's face it, even if the price of those cards comes down by 20-30%, 40% even when the console launches, which is not likely, but let's just live in Disney World for a moment and say that it does, you're still looking at a card which, just for half a terabyte, is going to cost you as much as a console. So I don't think that's the route that Microsoft are probably going to want to go for the expandability of their console, but who knows. While I'm on the subject of the PlayStation 5, I'd also like to discuss a series of rumours that have been doing the rounds concerning a PlayStation 5 Pro model. So a lot of this stems from a NeoGAF thread where VFX Veteran, you know what, I'll read out the post itself. Alright people, one last time, I heard there are 2 consoles per company. The mid-gen refresh are going to be introduced at release, so these consoles can run an entire 7-year cycle. XSX, that released yesterday, was the top end one, 12 T-flops. There will be a base Xbox Series X that is lower than that one. Sony is launching 2 PS models. The base PS5 is 9 T-flops, and they will also release a new one to compete with the top end Xbox Series X. That makes sense while we're getting mixed numbers for each platform. I've also heard that the top of the line models will be expensive. No prices, but around $600. No date on when the top end models will come out for the PS5. My guess is they're going to release both models at the same time, end quote. However, I'm very skeptical of that information. I'll go by I'm skeptical of it in just a moment, but Tydex himself on Twitter, who is quite well respected in the PlayStation community, as well as Tommy Fisher, who is also well respected in the PlayStation community, say that no, that's not true at all. There is no PlayStation 5 Pro currently in terms of development kits. And honestly, I don't think that makes sense what this guy is saying, because I think even the next generation Xbox, I think it's going to get a mid-cycle upgrade, because 7 years to not have an upgrade for a console, that just doesn't make any sense to me. 7 years is a long time, unless this console generation is going to be much shorter, in which case it's still not a 7-year cycle. I personally believe that the PlayStation 5 Pro, if it exists and if it's released, is going to release in 2-3 years, regardless of the specs of the PlayStation 5, and regardless of the specs of the next generation Xbox. They're going to release a new system. Because honestly, tech moves so bloody quickly. I mean, as insane as Zen 2 is, which of course forms the basis of both next generation consoles, albeit with some caveats, and RDNA is pretty insane. But ignore the number of compute units, ignore the amount of clock frequency and all that stuff just for a moment. It's great to discuss figures like T-flops. It's great to discuss bandwidth and amount of RAM, but there is a lot more to a console in terms of just the sheer capabilities on the silicon. Like, ray tracing isn't just ray tracing support. One of the reasons I keep bringing up, I would like to know what the capabilities of the ray tracing inside the RDNA is because we don't even know how efficient it is compared to Nvidia. Now, it's possible that the next generation RDNA is better than Nvidia's current generation when it comes to ray tracing. But we're basing a lot of this information off of, quite honestly, not that much information in terms of the patents, as well as some other very wishy-washy statements that have been released in public. But what we can probably ascertain is that given Microsoft are, let's say, important in the development of DirectX, which is of course important in the direction of PC technology, we can probably presume that the next generation AMD cards are at least capable when it comes to ray tracing. But like, how many rays does it generate? What efficiency does it do things like calculating what rays are not useful? How accurate is it? What is the penalty for this in terms of rasterization? What approach are game developers being encouraged? What is the development kits like? What's the workflow for it? There are so many different questions on just ray tracing alone. Just saying ray tracing, or it's like saying anti-aliasing, and it's not a great analogy, but I'm not feeling great, so it's the best I can come up with, damn it. It's like if you say to someone, well, my GPU can do anti-aliasing at 4K, and you say to them, okay, what anti-aliasing? Are we talking like FXAA? Are we talking MSAA? You know, are we talking some type of super sampling here? Like, what type of anti-aliasing are you referring to? It's very difficult to pin something down, and I'm getting way off topic here, and I'm going completely on a tangent. But I guess my point is that when it comes to the actual capabilities of a machine, I think the tech moves so fast, I'm very skeptical that a console refresh is going to release at the very beginning of a cycle. Now, does that mean that there's a PlayStation 5 Pro that's going to launch? I personally think yes. Regardless of the specs, I think Sony will launch a PlayStation 5 Pro, and I think we're going to get an upgraded Xbox. To all of my knowledge, though, I don't think that one's being worked on right now. And that's my personal beliefs. But with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. The normal stuff, if you did, like, share, comment and subscribe. Because I've been a bit sick the last couple of days, I have been running behind on a couple of videos, but they are being worked on, albeit much slower than what I'd like. The good news is I've written a couple of scripts. I just need to not look like death so I can get in front of the camera. Oh, and actually have the concentration that's not equate to a walnut. But anyway, thanks very much for all the well wishes, guys. I am on the mend, but I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.